Until the announcement went out, I was giving myself 100 reasons why I shouldn't do this, but we're at a turning point for the university. In Nebraska, the salaries of faculty and staff have been frozen. Tuition is probably going to have to go up. This thing called the NIL is completely remaking what collegiate athletics looks like.
Educate, inform, inspire. The Dan Parsons Show. A podcast that lifts up instead of tearing down.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Dan Parsons Show. I'm your host, Dan Parsons. I'm really excited for today's guest, Brent Comstock, the founder and CEO of BCom and newly announced candidate for the University of Nebraska Board of Regents. But before I get to Brent, I've got a favor to ask. I'd be grateful if you'd consider supporting the show by becoming a friend of Dan on Patreon. If you believe in our mission of lifting up instead of tearing down, your $5 monthly membership lets me devote the time and resources necessary to this important project. And it also supports our team. It would really mean a lot to me. Just go to thedanparsonsshow.com to sign up. Okay, here's my interview with Brent Comstock, candidate for the University of Nebraska Board of Regents. Enjoy. Hey, it is my pleasure to welcome back to the Dan Parsons Show, Mr. Brent Comstock, founder and CEO of BCom. And Brent announced just last week that he is a candidate for the University of Nebraska Board of Regents. Brent, welcome back to the show and congratulations.
Same show, new role, right? I'll evolve every time I see you.
Exactly. Here, let me set this up. Zach Wendling's story in the Nebraska Examiner last week said this: Brent Comstock, 29, is the CEO of Lincoln-based marketing firm BCom, which he started a decade ago after having thought up the idea for the business while he was in school. The District 1 seat Comstock is running for is held by Regent Tim Clare of Lincoln, who announced earlier this spring that he would not seek a fourth 6-year term next year. The NU Board of Regents District 1 includes the northern half of Lincoln, as well as the surrounding communities of Emerald, Malcolm, Agnew, and Davie. So my first question is, will you be having an event at the Ding-a-Ling Bar in Raymond?
We're going to go to every bar in this district, I think. Maybe we'll start there. But it covers a big swath of Lancaster County. And it's basically, I tell people, if you think of the county in a long, tall rectangle, if you cut off below Highway 2 and just go all the way up. So there's a lot of diverse communities that exist in the district.
But on a more serious note, why do you want to serve? Why Regent? And why now?
Great question. So I came to this somewhat unnaturally. We had heard, and I've known Tim and found out that he wasn't running again. I asked a bunch of people, including many of my clients, if they were going to run. And the answer consistently was no, 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 no. And maybe you should think about it. And the first 10, I thought they were a little bit crazy. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the university touches every aspect of the state. It's extension in rural communities. It's UNMC and world-class cancer research. It's college degree programs. It's Memorial Stadium. And as a business leader and a community leader, my commitment has always been to do whatever I can to make where I call home and where my teammates call home a better place. And I think that the University of Regents is probably the best position to do that. And also, I think it's the most important public institution in the state. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, and I've known you for a long time and know the work that you do. And it had to have been kind of a surreal moment in deciding that you were going to do this.
Yes, it was surreal. And until the announcement went out, I was giving myself 100 reasons why I shouldn't do this.
As any good candidate should. Yeah.
As any good candidate. And I was like, if I'm my own counselor, that's probably a problem. But no, I think we're at a turning point for the university. If you have read anything about college, in Nebraska, the salaries of faculty and staff have been frozen. You know that tuition is probably going to have to go up. And you also know that this thing called the NIL is completely remaking what collegiate athletics looks like. And so it's really a turning point. And I think the next 10 years is going to define how we compete, how we grow as a state, because if we don't keep our very top talent here, how can we grow our communities in our state? And keeping the talent here, right? It's great to get a world-class education, but then if you jump ship and move to the coast and take that education with you, we really haven't embodied that aspect of keeping people here. And that's something that every politician talks about on the stump speech, right? We want to retain, recruit, attract. And I think that if we don't have a university structure to do that, that's not going to be possible.
Yeah. I want to dive into some of those, but maybe start with what are some of those top issues facing the university? You ticked off a few of them there, but what will you focus on during this campaign?
Yeah, I think affordability is an important one, and not just for a 4-year degree program, right? It's affordability for undergraduates. It's affordability for people to be able to have and earn a living wage and an increase in salaries if you're faculty and staff. It's also the affordability of this new, federal case around NIL, the $2+ billion, almost $3 billion settlement that is basically saying the University of Nebraska has to pay college athletes now $20 million. Conveniently or fortunately, the athletic department seems to be in a good financial place to be prepared for that. But you think about that in the grand scheme of things, right? Inflation in our country, you think about the cost of everything going up. And I think to not acknowledge the fact that we need to think about how do we keep things as affordable as possible, and two, how do we implement new revenue streams across the university, not just in the athletic department and in the NIL ecosystem, but how do we think about tech transfer? How do we think about economic commercialization? If we have faculty that are doing, groundbreaking, world-renowned research, that is a revenue generator as well for the institution. And I think so. The affordability piece is one, and thinking about it not just from how do we keep costs down, but how do we increase revenue in a way that benefits the state. And then also, how do we think about developing our workforce, right? We have a lot of people here. We have a lot of degree programs that are important, but we also have a lot of programs that we need to figure out how does that convert to a good paying job? Because unless someone's going to be a student for 50, 60 years, at some point they've got to earn a paycheck, right? And so how do we make sure that we're preparing the people that do come here for the 21st century working environment? And I think there's a lot of discussion around cuts and budget cuts. And I am not yet elected, and I'm not going to measure the drapes too proactively. But I think there's a question around how do we make the University of Nebraska system the very best it can be? That might mean moving things around. That might mean cutting things, but consolidating them in a way that makes the experience for the student, faculty, and staff better as well, right? So I think every option needs to be on the table. We need to think about it from the same perspective that we're thinking about collegiate athletics, which is how do you manage things that sometimes, you may or may not be well equipped for. And on the bedrock of all of that is the fact that the regents are the people that largely guide that process, right? And I think that Nebraskans should feel seen and heard in who they elect as a regent, because it's more than just what tuition costs. It's what funding is getting allocated towards cancer research. It's what is extension being funded in rural parts of the state. So there's so much to focus on, but I think affordability, transparency, coming up with those ways to make the university the best place and informing people about it in the right way so people know that's what we're doing.
Well, that's interesting, Brent, because there has been a lot of pressure on the university in recent years. There's been the challenges of funding. You mentioned it. I mean, not only cuts from the new administration in Washington for some programs, but also, the challenge of state funding and the cuts from the legislature and the governor. And so given all of those challenges. And the other thing, I think it's been a challenge. I had a conversation with Brian Sloan, the recently, as of last week, or maybe this week, retired president of the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And he's been constantly talking about how do we keep and attract young talent to this state? And obviously, that's one of the biggest challenges of the University of Nebraska. So anyway, all of that to say, as someone who skews a little bit younger demographic, as a politician in this state, what do you say to those young people who are either considering staying in Nebraska or coming to Nebraska of why they should do that to the University of Nebraska?
I think that young people have an opportunity to really be part of creating that Nebraska that everyone wants to see. And like myself, I think it's no secret to many people that have read my bio. I started this company that gave me the financial freedom to be able to make this decision to run for a volunteer position before I was 30 because of the hard work ethic that my parents instilled in me. My dad's a plumber. My mom was a special ed teacher. And it was the work ethic that got me to where I am. And if you take that type of work ethic and you take the education that someone can get from an R1, kind of flagship institution, land grant university like the University of Nebraska, you have a really great opportunity. Now, that's a lot harder to do if you're chasing the political tides of the day, whether it's on the left or on the right. And that's why when I launched this campaign, I said, just like Tim Clare has done for 3 terms now, he has run a campaign and he has served as a regent that was not left or right or taking talking points from one side or the other. It was what's good for the University of Nebraska is good for the state of Nebraska. And I think that's how you create an ecosystem that wants young people to come here. They can make up their own mind about where they sit politically or ideologically, and they can learn from other people because there's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions in that environment. And I think that's the best way, and then the way that it should be, that a university system is structured.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier the NCCA settlement. A federal judge approved a settlement just last week, ending 5 years of litigation against the NCCA in Power 5 conferences. The settlement allows schools to directly compensate athletes for name, image, and likeness. It's capped annually based on the Power 5 revenues starting July 1st, but this current and former athletes will receive, as you said, almost $3 billion in damages over the next 10 years. How does the university begin to manage that? And B, what is the long-term effect of college amateur athletics because of this settlement?
It's a great question. And I think the outcome of the settlement is because there was so much confusion around this, right? Like I've had family members that have come up to me since I've announced this campaign. And they're like, what are you going to do about college athletes getting paid? And the answer is, well, I individually am not going to do much of anything. Maybe I would have worked a little harder in those sports practices in high school if I had known that this was an option. But look, I think, the University of Nebraska Athletic Department is responsible for making sure that $20-some million is paid to athletes. I think obviously that is revenue out, which means they've got to bring revenue in. For those diehard Husker fans, you've probably seen things in the news about the reorganization of seating at Memorial Stadium, the reallocation of season tickets to the Bob for volleyball, and a lot of that is the same mindset of like, we're spending more, so we've got to bring in more. The settlement, though, it completely reshapes the collegiate sports model, right? Because it's not just about scholarships anymore. It's now about scholarships and it's about fair compensation. And for those people that haven't followed this, the athletes will not be employees of the university. They will be effectively sponsorship deals that have contingencies. You have to be a good student. You have to deliver, conduct yourself in a way that would uphold the values of the institution, just as you would in a scholarship landscape. But it's also not just about football and volleyball either, right? Now, basketball and soccer and softball all have this opportunity to be competitive amongst their peers, when before it was just based on media opportunities, right? Bowling, we have an award-winning bowling team in Nebraska, and people don't know about it. So I think it's a landmark moment. I think how it relates back to the Regents race is we have to have regents who understand how athletics fits into the broader mission of the university, and how to balance the tradition of the Tom Osborne era, the compliance of making sure that we're not setting ourselves up for statewide and national, failure, and also the fairness aspect of it. And I think, as I think about this and how the regents play into this, is thinking about how do we connect the dots between the opportunities we're creating for these student athletes, and how does that tell the story for the state? Because Nebraskans care very deeply about their teams. We're very loyal. We talk about the 90s a lot because, one, we don't want to let go, and two, we also refuse to move on, and we really want to lean into success. But they want the university to lead and not lag. And I think that the opportunity here is doing the right thing, and there's a lot more to come. But it's a great example of how we have to evolve as an institution. And it'll be interesting to see how that shapes out.
Well, and I think there's always been this natural friction within the university, as I understand it. I've never, other than being a student, I've never been involved in the university from an administrative side, but it just seems like there's always been this friction between the natural sports-minded fan base that we have, that's what everyone thinks of Nebraska about, and then the academic side of research and professors of tenure who are doing incredible work in academics around the state and around the world that we're known for, that doesn't get that same attention. So what is that balance as a regent without being thrown into it yet? It just seems like that's a continued challenge, I think.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm having to remind myself as I campaign for this that the Board of Regents is a governance board. And so I keep telling people it's the job of a regent to govern and to be the biggest champion and cheerleader for the university. I think in those two spaces, particularly related to NIL and just revenue streams writ large, things like public-private partnerships are like fundamental. Part of my bio, and I think that's been interesting about this race, is that I got my undergraduate degree in North Carolina because there was a public-private partnership that made it more cost-effective for me to go to a public university there than to go here. And if we want to retain and attract, the very best, we've got to work to do that. And the good news is we have an alumni base that wants to do that. There are opportunities. We have some pretty notable alums and that have made, been pretty successful. And a lot of them have done so very quietly because we're humble. And so, thinking about, how do you create public-private partnerships, that being the cheerleader and the connectivity. I've done work across the country. I've been on national boards. I've been on statewide boards. I've worked with Democrats. I've worked with Republicans. I've worked with Congress. I've worked with CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. All of those things are part of that cheerleading aspect in the role of the regent. And I think, faculty research and fellowships is something that I'm deeply passionate about, because if we don't have great faculty, we're not going to have great students developed here. And if the students don't have a world-class education, then they might get the job of their dreams, but on the national stage, people are going to go, oh, well, don't recruit from here, don't recruit from there. But in the inverse of that, when we have these kind of world-renowned opportunities and winning athletic teams and nationally recognized scholars in their field, that's how you kind of raise that bar. And when you raise the bar, the dollars will follow. Probably not, frankly, from state funding. I think it's pretty clear that state funding is going to be challenged for a pretty long while until they can balance that out. And that's what happens in the legislature. And I think the role of the regent is to advocate strongly. And then in a world where the university has these goals, but the state only funds this much for here and here, then how do we as leaders fill that gap? Whether it's fundraising, whether it's connecting and thinking strategically, whether it's thinking, how do we take learnings from the NIL model and apply those to different areas of the university, is definitely part of the job. And then governing, right? Like, we don't do the day-to-day decisions, which will be a challenge for me, but I'm committed to it. But there are 8 regions, right? And so we have 8 brains to put together from very different walks of life, to be able to think through, how do we do this? And it's not just for the 4-year undergraduate degree. This impacts cancer research at UNMC. It impacts ag research on East Campus and at the Curtis Ag Campus out in rural Nebraska. It impacts extension. It impacts, the high school programs that put that brand in front of everyone. And so if we do it right, we've got a statewide brand and an audience that's eager to participate at every level. The inverse of that is, if you don't do it right, then you've got a really big problem. And that's going to take a lot of creative thinking amongst the regents and university leadership.
Yeah. A couple more questions before I cut you loose here. You've run a very successful company that's dedicated to helping people get elected. What's going to be like being on the other side of that equation?
It's humbling and it's exciting. I have learned that being a candidate means that, one, every time you see someone that wants to talk to you, you are obligated and should feel compelled to listen to them. And not that I didn't care about that before, but it's just a different experience, yeah. Right? And I think I've done a lot of work behind the scenes, and when I thought about this position, there were a lot of people that asked, what's the angle here? He didn't get his undergrad degree here, or something like that. And the angle is, it's all about impact, right? I know what it looks like when you have real effective leadership, and I know what it looks like when you don't. And I have been part of both of those equations. I remember when we were building our company, I didn't always have the right answers. And I remember what burden that put on us. The university is a magnitude larger than that. But at the end of the day, it's still about people. And I had a mentor who has since passed, who's very, very successful in business, who said, every business is a people business. And I think the business of the university is the business of the state. And so we've got to make it about Nebraska's future. And that's why we've got a coalition of supporters. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have people that have never endorsed before. We have people that have endorsed a lot that are saying, run and do this. But I'm willing to go to talk to anyone about anything. If there were opponents that were emerging, I've called them. If there were people that were naysayers, I've left them a voicemail. Because why? We don't have the luxury of saying, well, I'm just going to cast those people's opinions out. And I think people will say that that's naive, but I also know for me, it's not about access. It's not about ladder climbing. It's not about positioning. It's about the fact that I've committed to running a business here that I want to see grow and continue to grow. And the university plays, probably larger than any other singular institution in the state, a significant role in doing that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I was going to ask you. You had mentioned alumni and the relationships you have, and again, I've done projects with you. I've watched your career the past many years here, and I do know that it is about relationships with you. And I think so. Just maybe talk a little bit about that coalition that you've already, within just a handful of days, and announcing your candidacy, that you've put together.
Yeah, it's been very humbling. I think we're over 50, or we're on our way to 50 plus public endorsements from community leaders and elected officials and business leaders, former regents, current regents, the mayor. And the thing that's interesting about all of this, though, is that we're getting to explain why this institution matters. Yeah. Right. And so a subtle plug, go to comstockforregent.com. You can fill in your information. We'll put you on the mailing list. We're going to try and not be the annoying email people, but we will keep you updated, and we'll ask you for money every once in a while. But, the coalition that has been built is a group of people that on any other issue, pick a social issue, pick political donations, but they're here, and they're here. But they all fundamentally agree that the university's future needs to be built and evolved around what's good for everyone here in Nebraska, not what's good for the Republican Party, not what's good for the Democratic Party, but what's good for Nebraska. And so it's been humbling. A lot of people have said, "Oh my God, how long have you been building this out?" And it's like, I started this exploration no sooner than when Tim said that he was stepping down. And I every time I get a chance to praise him, I do. And it's not to be facetious. It's because he has faced a lot of pressure from his own party to do what's right. And I think if he has the courage to do it, then we all should step up and do it as well. But over the course of the last just couple of weeks, it's been very humbling. This race is going to be expensive. If you have followed higher education or just education races, think school board, local school board, state school board, it's become the political lightning rod, right? And so we're going to need support. I will solicit support from both sides of the aisle, because we need to build a coalition that's strong, because when we do that, everyone has power, not special interests or party bosses, but the people in the state are the ones that get a say in what the university looks like.
Yeah. Brent Comstock, candidate for University of Nebraska Board of Regents. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Dan. Good to be with you.
Hey, thanks, Brent, and good luck in your race for Regent. Thanks to our great team here at Parsons who made this show possible. Chase Porter, executive producer. Ike Samanis, producer and graphic design. Penology Tech Solutions for their technical help and equipment. And Kim Remington, Parsons PR's Director of Operations. But most importantly, thanks to each of you for tuning in today and for your continued support. Okay, that's today's show. Thanks for tuning in. Now go do good things. I'm Dan.